That night Jesus left Jerusalem and went out with his disciples across the Kidron Valley to the foot of the Mount of Olives, and entered the Garden of Gethsemane. He then told his disciples, "Pray that you may not come into temptation." He withdrew from them about a stone's throw, knelt down, and prayed, "Abba, if you are willing, remove this cup from me. But not my will, but yours be done." In anguish he prayed earnestly, and his sweat, like great drops of blood, fell from his face to the ground. When he got up from prayer, he came to the disciples and found them sleeping because of grief, and said to them, "Why are you sleeping? Get up and pray that you may not come into temptation." Judas knew that Jesus met often with his disciples to pray in the garden. He came leading a large crowd sent by the chief priests and elders of the people. They were carrying lanterns and torches and weapons. Judas approached Jesus, said, "Rabbi," and kissed him. Then they laid hands on him and arrested him. But one of those who stood near drew his sword and struck the slave of the high priest, cutting off his ear. Jesus said to them, "Have you come out with swords and clubs to arrest me as though I were a bandit? Day after day I was with you in the temple teaching, and you did not arrest me." Then all the disciples deserted him and fled. Son of God, we remember your journey.
When day came, the religious leaders of the people and the high priests and scholars all got together and brought Jesus before their high council. They were looking for testimony against Jesus to put him to death, but they found none. Many gave false testimony against him, but their testimonies did not agree. Finally, the high priest said, "If you are the Messiah, tell us." Jesus replied, "If I tell you, you will not believe, and if I question you, you will not answer. But from now on, the Son of Man will be seated at the right hand of the power of God." All of them asked, "Are you then the Son of God?" He said to them, "You keep saying I am." Then they said, "What further testimony do we need? We have heard it ourselves from his own lips." They bound him, led him away, and handed him over to Pilate, the Roman governor of Judea. Son of God, we remember your journey.
Meanwhile, Peter had followed the crowd from a safe distance. Another disciple got him into the courtyard of the high priest. Some of the people had made a charcoal fire because it was cold, and Peter stood with them to stay warm. Then a servant girl, seeing him in the firelight, stared at him and said, "This man was with him." But he denied it, saying, "Woman, I do not know him." A short time later, someone else noticed him and said, "You also are one of them." And Peter said, "Man, I am not." About an hour later, still another kept insisting, "Surely you were with him. You are a Galilean." But Peter said, "Man, I do not know what you are talking about." And he went out of the courtyard and wept bitterly. Son of God, we remember your journey.
The high council and a crowd rose as an assembly and brought Jesus before Pilate, and they began to accuse him of causing civil unrest and breaking Roman laws. They said, "We found this man undermining our law and order, forbidding taxes to be paid to Caesar, and saying that he is the Messiah, a king." Pilate asked Jesus, "Are you the king of the Jews?" "Those are your words, not mine," Jesus replied. Pilate told the high priests and the accompanying crowd, "I find no basis for your accusations against this man." But they were insistent. He's stirring up unrest among the people with his teaching, disturbing the peace everywhere, starting in Galilee and now all through Judea. He is a danger to the peace. When Pilate heard that, he asked, "So, he's a Galilean?" And when he learned that Jesus came under the jurisdiction of Herod, the ruler of Galilee, Pilate sent Jesus off to Herod, who was in Jerusalem at that time. Herod was delighted when Jesus showed up. He had wanted to see him for a long time and hoped that Jesus would perform a sign. Herod asked Jesus many questions, but Jesus did not answer any of them. The high priest and scholars were there, still forcefully accusing him. After seeing no response from Jesus, Herod began to treat him with contempt and mock him. His soldiers joined in, and Herod dressed Jesus up in an elaborate king costume and sent him back to Pilate. Son of God, we remember your journey.
Pilate then called together the chief priests, the leaders, and the people, and said to them, "You brought me this man and accused him of inciting unrest. I have examined him and found him not guilty of any of your charges. Neither has Herod, for he sent him back to me. This man has done nothing to deserve death." Hoping to appease them, he said, "I will have him flogged and then release him." But the crowd cried out, "If you release this man, you are no friend of the Emperor of Rome." When they said this, Pilate was afraid. It was true that anyone who set himself up as a king defied Caesar, and any disruption of the peace could lose him his position and the power he held as governor. Seeing that a riot was beginning, Pilate sentenced Jesus to death. Son of God, we remember your journey.
The soldiers took Jesus into the palace. They braided a crown from thorns, set it on his head, threw a purple robe over him, and mocked him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" They banged on his head with a club, spat on him, and knelt down, pretending to worship him. Then they stripped him of the robe, put his own clothes back on, and led him away to crucify him. Later that morning, they brought Jesus to the place of the skull, which in Hebrew is called Golgotha. There they crucified him with 2 others, one on either side. Above his head on the cross, the criminal charge against him was posted. "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." About 3 p.m, Jesus cried with a loud voice and breathed his last. All who had come around as spectators to watch the show, when they saw what actually happened, were overcome with grief and headed home. But all of Jesus' acquaintances, along with the women who had followed him from Galilee to serve him, stood at a respectful distance and kept vigil. Late in the afternoon, Joseph of Arimathea, a highly respected member of the Jewish High Council, went to Pilate and asked for Jesus' body. Pilate granted his request and gave Joseph the corpse. Joseph wrapped it in clean linens, placed it in a tomb that had been cut into the rock, rolled a large stone across the opening, and left. Son of God, we remember your journey.